So let's first take a deeper dive in the MDS coding pattern changes. First, I want to look at the nursing payment drivers. So let's look at this pre and post PDPM implementation. So in the first column, you can see that from July, August, and September, so this would have been fiscal year Q4 or calendar year Q3 of 2019. You start with extensive services. And then to the right, we're going to move to the post PDPM implementation quarters. And we now have 3 full quarters to look at. So you see in extensive services, in the coding of extensive services, you've seen just a slight, kind of a gradual increase over time until we hit calendar year Q2 of this year, the quarter we just finished. And I'm sure we're all sitting here thinking, not a surprise here, right? Certainly not unexpected, especially because isolation is coded in extensive services, right? So this makes sense for many folks. We did see an increase nationally here. Under depression, right? This, again, pre-PDPM, we were capturing about 4.9% of the assessments had depression coded. Well, we're the very next quarter, jumping up in the very next quarter where we've implemented PDPM, we see this doubling, 9.8%. So a pretty dramatic jump in coding, okay? And then in the subsequent quarter, obviously it continues on an upward trend. And then in this last quarter completed, just kind of gradually, pretty much staying about the same. So kind of leveling off. But again, you see this dramatic jump. So when you see those, and I think those should send up little red flags to us and say, okay, what changed? Well, we know the rate, right? It's now a rate driver. And so this is something that CMS is certainly going to focus on, is why all of a sudden did we see a dramatic change in the population from quarter 3 of calendar year Q3 to calendar year Q4 in the facilities? Not likely. But we now know, obviously, the change in payment model might be incentivizing us. So CMS is going to be most likely targeting this, right? So again, we should be too. And then likely, along the same lines, restorative. Restorative, we certainly have not seen the dramatic increases across the board, as you saw in the other two, but just more of a slow increase and then stabilization here in the last 2 quarters. Okay, let's take a look at speech component in PDPM. Again, you see in the first column the pre-PDPM calculations, and again, these are the percent of assessments that have the code these particular areas. A cognitive impairment, here pre-PDPM, 13% of the MDSs coded with cognitive impairment, but yet another very dramatic jump in the first quarter of PDPM. And you see here the upward trend continues through the next 2 quarters. And here we are landing in the last completed quarter at over half of the assessments being submitted are showing cognitive impairment. And again, the important thing to look at this or to understand about this is the first level analysis here. And so we're seeing this, and these where we say, okay, we're seeing patterns and trends in the data, and it's potentially telling different stories. And so we have to understand why these things are happening. And so in a little bit, we'll go into some more strategies on deeper dive and root cause. Okay, let's move on to swallowing disorder. Pretty much the same story here. Very dramatic increase from the 4.7% of assessments in pre-PDPM and 15.7% in the first quarter since the start of PDPM. And again, the upward trend continues as you look to the right. In Q1 of 2020, calendar Q1, 17.26. Nice little steady increase, and then we've kind of leveled off with just a slight downward tick in calendar year Q2 or April, May, June. Okay, and I want to make sure I qualify all of these with the, the fiscal year and the calendar year here, and make sure I call them out specifically. And then lastly, the mechanically altered diet has certainly been a much slower increase, but nevertheless an increase from 23.5% to nearly 31%. So definitely, certainly some areas. And if you think about it, these are two areas of the nursing and speech areas that were not heavily focused in the RUGS model. So that's why I wanted to, again, call out these 6 very specific payment drivers related to nursing and speech, because we need to, whenever we see these patterns, it's really important for us to be going, okay, red flag here. Can we explain this? Can we make it? Because again, we've heard very, very loud and clear from CMS that one of the main reasons why we switched from the RUGS model is because there were certainly some interesting incentives to focus and code in certain ways. And so they're going to be watching very, very closely at these kinds of things. Okay. Next, let's turn to non-therapy ancillaries and take a look at what we're seeing nationally in terms of the distribution across the 6 case mix groups here. And, I displayed it this way, on purpose so that you could see these subtle changes month over month. And again, hopefully you have the ability to look at this same kind of breakdown in whatever system you use in terms of the PDPM insights that this information can provide. So on the left-hand side, the lower left-hand side, I gave you a little legend here to look at. And there we see the case mix groups and the NTA score range breakdowns or the cut points, okay? And then across the top, you'll see the case mix indices for each of the case mix groups. And this is a really important thing to understand and to look at. And so here I've broken down the first 2 quarters of calendar year 2020, and to see what we're seeing across the board. And again, this is the percent of assessments that we're seeing at the PointRight national average. Okay. And if you look, you really don't see any dramatic changes in percentages of assessments. However, when you look at the NTAs, it's important to consider even the small percentage changes can mean a change in the multiplier, which certainly can add up or detract. So you see, if I click here on NF, let's first look there. And this is the lowest case mix group that has a CMI of 0.72, so below 1. Okay, so in January, we're at 21.9% nationally. And so, but by April, it was kind of creeping up there to 20.1%, May 20.3, and excuse me, creeping down nationally, excuse me. And so what that means here is that the good news there is that means that the more were being assigned into the other categories that had a higher percentage or higher case mix index, right? So let's say they move to the NE, that that would now be able to have 0.96 as your multiplier. Okay, again, so looking at some of these subtle changes can help us see what's going on in your facility. You can do the exact same thing with your facility or organizational data. Okay, let's look at here in the NB and the NC categories. Again, you see some subtle changes in NB, a little bit over 0.5% percentage point increase. And in NC, an increase of a little over 1.5%, right? So again, subtle changes. So again, perhaps, and again, more percent of assessments are landing in this category, which has the 1.8 case mix index. Okay. And lastly, here you see like an ND going from a 31.4 to a 32.6 nationally. Again, this is just one way to visualize. So, I hope you see that there's lots of different ways to look at the data. And again, this is just top level, first level review. And so by bringing, again, my goal today is to really to help you look at some of these key insights that you could then go in and target, because we know you've got your mind elsewhere. And so we wanted to bring this information to you to help you prioritize some things to look at and to consider for deeper dive into the details. Okay. Let's look at the distribution of NTA case mix a little differently here. So here you see in more of a bar chart, and this just has the last calendar quarter. So this is calendar quarter 2 for 2020. And again, you've got your legends on the right so you can see. And here in the red box are the lower 2 case mix groups. And nationally, over 50%, a little over 50% of the assessments are landing in these lower 2. So the difference, and if you look at the legend here and the score range, you see that 1 point and 1 possible diagnosis or comorbid condition that could qualify could change you from an NF to an NE and go from a 0.72 to a 0.96, or all the way up, from a 0.96 to a 1.34. And again, making that multiplication or that multiplier more impactful. And so even leaving, 1 diagnosis on the table and not getting that coded can certainly have an impact in your reimbursement. And especially, more than, you multiply that by the number of admissions times, 12 months in a year, certainly can add up over time. Okay, so again, data visualization is important. So how you look at the data, how you lay it out that can provide more insight into what's going on in your facility.